What is up, everybody? It is Vex here today, and today we're with another episode of the podcast Wrong Way Scared to Read. Yes, today's topic of question is horror in action games. Yes, this is a topic I've been wanting to talk about for a while. Does it work? Is it worth it? Is it even considered horror at that point? Well, I have some game examples here today, some topics I would like to talk about them and how well it works, and just a general overview of horror and action games. Now, what exactly do I mean by horror and action games? Well, there are games like Diablo, um, I want to say Path of Exiles, and even sometimes you see it in like looter shooters like Destiny. They have a whole horror season right now, and that's an action game. Well, I'm going to talk about a few of the biggest examples where it worked and a few of the biggest examples where they failed. All right. First, we're going to go on to Bloodborne. Bloodborne is a game that came out in 2015. It is an action role playing game, Souls like experience from Sony Computer Entertainment that released on the PlayStation 4, which we're getting hints that they're making a remake now, which is kind of cool. It's my favorite Souls like game. But it is a horror action game. It is based in like a British kind of, Victorian time setting. It's very gruesome, very cruel. Now, some people I've seen talked about it as it being more of a thriller, which I could agree with, but there are some elements of horror in there that works really well with it. Now, do you expect it to jump scare you? Probably not. But can it jump scare you? 100%. Like there's two times that I remember through my playthrough that is no longer on my YouTube channel that I had jumped twice, and I was terrified. So it worked really really well, and they've used this element in certain sections of their games, like in Dark Souls. Is it called Demon Dark Souls? Yeah, Dark Souls, where you have the no light areas. There's a certain cave and stuff that is just so dark, and there's these weird gruesome creatures that work really well, and they're terrifying to watch and deal with. And so this is an example where it works. It's really really good, and I want to see more of this kind of style in the games, but there are some of them where they seem to lack in. And a lot of people are gonna hate me for this one, but the biggest one that I can think of right off the bat is Bioshock. It is a game that is a first person shooting game by 2K Boston and 2K Australia. Now, the reason why I say it failed is through the whole game, you're expecting to get like scared. You're waiting for it. Nothing happens. Nothing ever happens. There's no like loud sound to proc the jump scare moment. Just nothing happens, and it's just such a waste. Bioshock 2, it got even worse, and then Bioshock 3, it got worse. Now, Bioshock 3 isn't an action horror game, but Bioshock 1 and 2 do label itself that way on multiple platforms. So it's one of those, like, if it's going to be a horror action game, lean a little bit more into the horror as much as you're leaning into the action, because you're going to want your players, viewers, and people who are backseat gaming to be scared or get goosebumps. I never got that playing it, and every time I see someone play through it, they've always made the comment, "I'm waiting to get scared," and there's never a moment where you feel like you get scared, and it's not really a horror game in my eyes right now. Like, I feel like it's gotten a lot worse, but it's one of the games that have failed in that aspect of combining horror and action, because you can fight back and be fine. Where in Bloodborne, you will fight back and fail and have to redo it. And there's an extra terrifying of being used to that pattern for that a random, oh, you forgot that guy's there. You have that, jump scare moment. Now, there are other games that I'd like to talk about that, add the tag horror onto it that isn't really horror. Like another one that was a super failure was Evil West, which released in 2022. It's a third person shooter game developed by Flying Wild Hogs and published by Focus Entertainment. The game was released on PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Windows, Xbox, and Xbox Series X and S on November 22nd. It received a giant mixed bags, but it had horror in its tag. It was actually the second tag after action. I was excited. A gothic, vampiric horror game. Giving me, and this was riding off of Resident Evil 8. And we were craving for that vampiric, that kind of style of horror that is gothic. And it did not deliver. Now, I'm not saying that any of these games aren't fun, but a lot of these games just really doesn't hit the mark and should drop horror for thriller. Now, it's fine that games aren't as what they advertise as in tags and genres, but I'm here to talk as a horror fan and a horror average consumer. Now, if you're playing a game like Diablo, and I'll go on to my next one before I actually start talking shit about Diablo. Diablo is a game franchise. It's an ARPG. It's an action RPG that's overhead, and it is a very grindy, very fun game. It's one of my favorite games of all time. The first game, perfect with the horror mixing elements. The second game, perfect with the horror mixing elements. The third game, it fails. It became too colorful, it became too bright, it became too vibrant, and a lesson on the gothic horror, those like real demon, like fear, like I'm fighting something that I should be scared about. And in Diablo 4, they dropped the ball again, being one of the greatest Diablo games to ever come out, but it fails. Games like Diablo add horror as an art style when it should be a genre. Horror is not an art style. That is like when you go into the gothics, into the ethereal, into the demonic. That's art. Art is not horror. Horror is a genre, and under that genre, there's categories that fulfill that to be a horror action game. Now, why am I bringing this as a topic, horror action, as a topic for a podcast episode? Well, simply because I can. There's no one who's going to stop me, and there will be people who try to correct me with their opinions, but this is not about their opinion. It's about my opinion. And yes, I'm going to be a little stewed about it, but there's other games that I'd like to add to this category. Games that are they claim to be horror games but are not horror games. And the biggest one that I want to talk about, and I really felt this, and I said it during my live streams of playing this game, was Dead Island 2. It was horror first tag. I was excited. I'm like, sweet. Dead Island 1 was very goofy, very, like, I'm okay with it being goofy and, like, scary at the same time, but they moved the horror tag to the top on all platforms. If you go to Steam, or is it on Steam? If you go to PlayStation, and you search up Dead Islands 2, it goes horror, action, FPS. Now, it's not even FPS either, but who cares? I'm here to talk about horror. And there's also a lot of, like, other games that have listed horror into their categories, like Mortal Kombat, which just isn't true. It's just an upsetting, depressed time. Now, games where it succeeds in, and I'm brighter than fucking hell because I just opened up a tab for notes, is Call of Duty Black Ops 6 or Call of Duty Zombies in general. It's perfect. You have that fun action where you feel like you are a god, but soon it takes it away, and it's just scary. It has these jump scare moments now in the newer games because of World War II that makes COD Zombies such a thrilling horror thing to play. Now, I know people who playing it don't think horror, but if you really break it down, there's jump scares in zombies, COD Zombies. There is horrific creatures, horror, like there's gothic art. It's very well detailed in lore, and it is meant to be a creeping scare. And that is the exact words that one of the developers in Zombies have used in the past for World War II zombies. And it's what they're using for the new map, Citadel des Morts, which is a gothic horror castle, is the words they described it, and I'm excited for it, and I will be streaming it and playing it here on this channel, but it's a good way to do it. Another game that nails it so much that at this point I think it should just be called a horror game because that's how fucking terrified I have been through playing through this game. It's a very new game. It's Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl. Stock 2 Heart of Chernobyl is a first-person shooter survival horror game, which has been published by a Ukrainian development team, GSC Game Worlds. It is a very, very scary game. At times, it's even terrifying. But there's also moments where it's like, oh, I have a gun. I can do something with this pistol in my hand. It's very well balanced, and that's what more of these action horror games should be doing. And it's very much important to a audience who sees that horror tag, who sees that there are these awesome blends of genres that work really well. Like a lot of people who would play an Alan Wake game would be very surprised that a action shooting game mixed with horror was such a phenomenal combine, and even Resident Evil has been able to do it too. It's just how you combine your genres is very important. And then there's also the visual novel. The visual novel games like Until Dawn, the Dark Age Anthology, it's such an important way to blend them. And I will also say The Witcher 3 does a better job at infiltrating horror elements into an action horror game than BioShock. I know I'm harding on BioShock real hard. And like another big surprise, and it's one of the world's most fan favorite games, blended it so well that it is got a DLC, and they doubled down. They doubled down on it. And if you don't know what game I'm talking about, it is a dark fantasy created by Hideo Miyazaki, maker of the Dark Souls games, and was also written by George R. R. Martin. And yes, obviously, I am talking about Elden Ring. Elden Ring is such a great game. If you haven't played it, where have you been? Honestly, but it's such a good, well combined of it. And one another game that really fails at it, like after showing all these games have successfully been able to combine these elements together, is a game like Death Stranding, where it is phenomenal. It is good. It deserves to be a bit more scarier than it is, but it's a thriller. And I feel like game genres are so scared to put another tag than either the one that people are majority used to. Like thriller. No one really sees a thriller in a game tag than a horror. You saw a horror, oh, that's a spooky game. It's got some spooks in it. It's got atmosphere. It's got pizzazz. Death Stranding is a game that yes has horror and thriller in it, but they can drop the horror tag and just emphasize on the um thriller. It could be a suspenseful thriller. It is very good at doing its job. It's so good, and I'm happy that it is a game and out. But I'm also excited. If you haven't seen the trailer for Death Stranding 2, they doubled down with the horror. This is what games should do. It's keeping to its roots, but it's adding more horror to it. And like a perfect game that was able to blend them so well together, not just having just horror elements thrown at you, but able to mash a good action game with horror elements sprinkled through it at moments where you're like, okay, yeah, I forgot that this is a horror game. And when it does remind me it's a horror game, it's bloody good. And I'm talking about Control. Control, I think, is one of the greatest video games of all time that has gone so underappreciated by the horror community that I think we should all give it a double check. It's got tons of DLC, it's got tons of fun, it's got tons of spooks in it, it's got lore that's going to make you want to play all the other games. Now, I know that a lot of people think, oh, Control's connected to Alan Wake. Alan Wake is the bigger brother. I think Control does a lot better job than Alan Wake 1. Alan Wake 2 does a lot better job than Control. But Control is just the better all experiences for new people to horror games and blends it so well that I am super impressed. Like, I am beyond impressed on how well and like organized they make this. And there's a lot of other games that I could go raving on about, like The Last of Us, how it really isn't a horror game, but it has horror as a tag. More of a thriller, more suspenseful, more grimy, and it's very different from what people expect. But I want to name one that is the opposite of what I'm talking about. where it leads too much into the horror and not into the action. It's an action horror game. You need to have a good blend of these things to be able to have a wonderful horror and action adventure. And I'm talking about Heavy Rain. Heavy Rain is not an action game, one, and it's not really a horror game, but it blends the other one better than the other. And it just kind of drags it down as a horror experience as well, even though it's more scary than action. But you want to be able to have those action moments because it builds up those moments like, oh yeah, I am playing an action game. This is a story game. This is something I could play, have fun, and then bam, like that, you get a jump scare and you remember that you're playing a horror game. That's what these elements are for. And coming from I have a background in video game engineering and video game design and in graphic design and stuff. That that is what the job is. And a lot of these games, they make you pay the $79.99 or $89.99, or if you're in the States, it's $69.99 for these experiences that you just leave. Like, I thought this was a horror game. I thought this was an action game. I thought this was a role playing game. But then you're left feeling like this wasn't what I expected. I enjoyed the experience, but it isn't what I expected, which is good. It is good and bad at the same time because the art of having a well balanced game is to understand your audience and your atmosphere and your themings and how to blend these to become a an art piece that can be enjoyed as a masterpiece. Now, I know I chose this episode just so I could talk shit about games, well, action games and horror games, because there's a lot of horror games that are really good, but also not really horror. But I want an opportunity just to talk shit, and that's why I like my show here. It is designed for me to feel good at the end of the night. Though if you do enjoy and you expected more content like the first episode where it was weird creepy pasta stories, well, don't be too sad. Those more of those are coming. More creepy pastas, more traditional, more horror stories will be coming. More ghost stories, more experiences will be coming through. Just taking a quick break to talk to you about the podcast. The first episode was very badly edited. Well, not edited, it just rendered badly because I didn't have a correct software to do it. Like an idiot, I'm like, I needed a separate software to do podcasts, but no, I don't really need to. I do Audacity and OBS, and I'm perfect and peachy. So that's what this one's being filled up. So it has a lot better quality. But there are other games on like these, like I have notes like, how the hell is a Borderlands 3 a horror action game? It's not. I threw tags out there just to make sure they covered an audience. But another game, and this game is the example, the best blending of horror and action and combining other genres together, and that is Half Life. Sorry, I had a burp. I was fighting it so I didn't come out in the podcast. Is Half Life. Half Life, I think, will always and forever be the most perfect blend of game genres. Other games will lose their sauce just because of a little bit of it, and they're afraid people are going to be like, "Oh, hey, this is a little spooky. Shouldn't it have a tag or something?" Then put thriller. Honestly, just put thriller in it, and you'll be good. But Half Life 2 is just a perfect, promiscuous example, and I'm actually very happy that it came out very well. Another game that mixes like a Souls action horror so perfectly that I'm even shocked I never played it until recently was Sana's Saga Hellblade 2. The trailers looked very actiony, looked like it would take away from it, but it doesn't. It's just so muy perfecto. It's so good. It is so good. If you haven't played the Sonic Blade and Sisters 2 games, they're about 8 hours each. They're not long games at all, but they're fun games. I would suggest Sana Saga 1 and 2. Now, future one that's coming up that I'm a little bit worried that is going to be more action than horror is Resident Evil 9. Now, Resident Evil 9, which is based off of a some lore that we have, is Resident Evil Island, and the main character is supposed to be Leon S. Kennedy, and supposed to be a further war zone action, whatever that means, which I think might take away from the horror elements, but it's something we have to wait and see. Like, there's a lot of characters in this one that could make it so perfect. We have an Alex Wesker, Chris Redfield, Leon Scott Kennedy, Jill Valentine, Moria Burton, Maya Winters, Mia Winters, which is good. Continues athlete. Claire Redfield, Barry Burton. There's Simon. There's Takui Tagami. There's like a good cast of characters, like an actually decent cast of characters into this one, which I really do appreciate. I really do. I think that is a perfect opportunity to show off what they can do as a studio in a sequel that is going to lead into horror more. Because Resident Evil 4, me, could be one of the greatest games of all time. Didn't win any rewards, but another one that I had to pick it. I had to pick it because we all know it's not a horror game, but but it's because of a one moment they picked it. Spider-Man 3. I know, odd. It's very very odd that they picked Spider-Man 3. I'm just moving my thing over as a horror. Like just because of one scene, it's I just wanted to mention it because it's hilarious. Hilarious that it's on there. But a lot of these are great examples of opportunities that could have been that will never be. And I just wanted to take a moment to talk about why that is sometimes. Because you can blend genres in it to be good, but sometimes should you blend the genres in that type of game? The answer is no. Anyways, we're gonna end off this wonderful podcast of me rambling about holy hell my mic's moving for 20 minutes as my pale white ass reads another creepy pasta story. This time we're going to CREEPY. I didn't have them loaded up this time. I tried to. But yeah, action horror games is just such a passion of mine that I wanted to talk so much shit about. But we're gonna pick one that's pretty short. I had one already I wanted, so I'm just pulling it up. Just to, read it to you guys. A really nice one. This is where was it? I have it saved. There we go. For the good of the people. Now, it's about 8 minutes. So it's pretty long. It's pretty long, but we have about 8 minutes we could read. It is written by Jay Adhere, edited by Craig Gorosky. All right. Think they're going to hear us. Come on. You're the loudest of us all, Joe, dragging that bum leg of yours. Joe tried to keep the volume down. It seemed deafening in the quiet night air, but he continued to kick up the gravel as he hobbled down the dirt road, struggling to keep up with the mob. They were 17 strong, so it was probable that their approach would not go unnoticed. The rest of the group didn't seem concerned. They had bellies full of whiskey and violence in their eyes. Their implements of destruction were varied: shovels, pitchforks, knives, shotguns. Father's farewells had abstained from the earlier nerve strengthening festivities, but he was in tow nonetheless, with an axe slung over his shoulder. Like the others, he believed with all of his heart that the Lavia family was a plague on their community. Tonight, Society of Peace and Justice, as they had labeled themselves earlier that evening, would cure that plague. After much discussion, the society had declared that the Livy family be to be witches. That unease of the townspeople began shortly after the Livy family moved to town, and old Miss Murray claimed that she had known them almost 30 years prior, in the 1860s. The issue was, not only had they gone by another name at the time, but more importantly, they all looked exactly the same then as they did present. They had made a deal with the devil, she claimed, in exchange for immortality. Miss Murray also claimed that the family needed to perform certain deeds and rituals to persevere this sinister agreement. This fueled rumors of the family, acts of sabotage to other farms, and their theft of property from neighbors. The entire Levy clan wore old, dark clothing, and they never attended Sunday Mass. Some said they chanted wicked devotions to Satan throughout the night and used Satan's dark powers to curse other farmers. It couldn't have been a coincidence that their arrival to this town just 1 year prior had coincided with the worst crop loss in the town's history. Joe was a simple man, and he nodded and tagged along that night without voicing an opinion. The matter, however, Joe did not exude the confidence of the other men. His heart had been beating furiously against his rib cage, and sweat had been dripping into his bloodshot eyes for hours prior to their departure. From that farm, when the candles in the window of the Levy farmhouse came into view, Joe's stomach turned, and a harsh fell over the group. The men spread out as planned. They got to the yard. Joe approached a small side window with O'Sullivan and Father Farrell. Their spy had informed them that this window led to the kitchen. Joe crouched outside the window and waited, his head flying this way and that. Spooked by every shadow, a moment later they heard Riley's crippling sound from the opposite side of the house. This was the signal to go. Father Farrell jumped up and thrust the end of his axe through the window, smashing it to bits. Old Sullivan jumped through the window without hesitation. Father Farewell pants became entangled, and jagged shards of glass around the window frame obscured Joe's view into the kitchen. Joe heard what sounded like a chair thrumbling over and heard a voice. What's the meaning of BAM? The blare and flash of O'Sullivan's shotgun almost made Joe tremble back onto the grass. After Father Farrell untangled himself, Joe crawled through the window and almost fell flat on his face. Immediately as his boots slid on the floor, he looked down to see the remains of what must have been Will Levy. Most of his face was missing, his skull in chunks all over the kitchen floor. The dead man's body twitched as if it was making an effort to fight off his attackers. Joe crumbled, gagging. He tried to catch his breath while the audio of the macabre scene in the surrounding rooms faded in and out, senses overwhelmed and failing him. The determined footfalls on a heavy foot echoes throughout the house and seemed to surround Joe. Intimidating screams from members of the Levi family infested his ears like leeches as he bore ear witness to their slaying. There were 8 family members, and by the sheer volume of the shrinking and shouting, Joe figured most of them had already been hunted down in those initial few moments. As he potentially crouched in the kitchen, a man burst through the door into the kitchen, shakily flailing the barrel of his gun toward Joe. Joe paddled backwards into the pantry, knocking shelves of jarred fruits onto the floor. Joe, what the hell are you doing in here? It was Riley. Just just looking for them. The last ones, Joe stammered. Check the back rooms now. Riley grabbed Joe by the collar and shoved him into a small side hallway before marching off towards the front of the house. Sweat dripping from Joe's brow as he crept through the dark and narrow hallways. He wanted to run, to slip off into the fields and abandon the scene, while the others were distracted, but he had nowhere to go. He rallied on the people in this town that he relied on, his farm. He hadn't been eager to go to the farmhouse, but he had aimed to choose the side of the Lord like Father Farrell told him he was doing. Though this didn't seem too godly to him, he noticed a small narrow staircase at the very end of the hall. Doubting that any of the men had ever noticed it, he realized that it might be present an opportunity to hide out. He would begin a search and come back down to the main floor once all the vicious noises had died out. Climbing up the staircase, all on all fours, Joe stepped into what he assumed would be an attic, but was surprised to see an expensive bedroom. He was even more surprised to see a member of the Levy family sitting cross legged on the far end of the room, her dark silhouette lit by a single candle directly behind her. This was the teenage daughter, Angelica. Joe realized, despite the chaos below, Angelica sat unflinching in her stained white sleep dress, her head down, a long, greasy black hair skewering her face. Did she realize what was going on right below her? Then Angela spoke. The voices seemed to surround Joe, and he wasn't sure that it was coming through the mass of dark hair at first. It sounded like a warped combination of a high pitched voice of a young girl and a raspy and rumbly voice of an engaged, colossal man in rage. You evil men, how dare you enter our home and place judgment upon us? I'm sorry, Joe stammered. I never meant. Instead of blaming us for your many problems, perhaps you should all turn to a mirror. She stood up slowly on bare feet and started taking a slow step towards Joe. You are oppressors of the oppressed, she continued. You lie, cheat, and steal. You all avert your eyes to the crimes of others to protect your own positions in this horrific community. Lil mess. Hand to heart. I never wanted to hurt nobody. Joe tried to back away from Angelica, moved closer, but he felt paralyzed as his boots were made of concrete. You put the blame on our family, but I will show you the truth, Simpson. You will see what you and your people have done. Angelica had flew upright, and she bared her teeth as she jumped at Joe from across the room, flying at him with temptatious speed. Her hands cracked into Joe's temple, and he fell to the dusty floor, and there was darkness. That was longer than 8 minutes, but that was for the good of the people. It doesn't end. It doesn't really end. It doesn't give you an answer what she did. I really like that. It's very pizzazzy. It's very interesting. I love these creepy pastas. You can go read more like these on creepypastastories.com or soon on my own website in the creepypasta or read along segments where you can read the greatest and weirdest creepypastas and horror stories you have ever seen. Anyways, this has been Scared to Read, where we talked about horror action games and we read one creepy pasta. I hope you like this podcast. It's very different, very unique than other podcasts where I'm just being me. I'm just being free to yap, and talk about things that most people be like, that's a silly topic. But it all arounds. Was that English? Who knows? All revolves around horror. Anyways, enjoy your night and remember to check under your bed and sleep with one eye open.